They say time heals all wounds, but they never tell you about the scars. My name is Emily, and for the last 10 years I've carried a regret so heavy that no amount of time has been able to lighten it. It began with a letter. I wasn't expecting anything unusual, just another stack of bills and a catalog I'd never look at, but when I opened the plain white envelope, I found a single line written in hurried, uneven letters. It wasn't your fault, but it could have been stopped. The words hit like a blow to the chest. At first I didn't understand what it meant, but then it all came flooding back. Memories I had buried, laughter over late-night conversations, the promise of a friendship that seemed unbreakable, and the one decision I'd give anything to undo. Nathan. Just thinking his name stirred a knot of emotions I wasn't ready to face. I had spent years trying to forget what happened, but this letter refused to let me. It wasn't just a reminder of the past, it was a call to confront it. Nathan was the kind of person you couldn't help but like. He had this energy, this way of making you believe that anything was possible. We met in college, two dreamers with big plans and even bigger blind spots. He had an artist's soul, passionate, expressive, and always chasing the next idea. I was the pragmatic one, the planner, who kept us grounded when he got carried away. Back then, Nathan wasn't just my friend, he was my anchor. Late nights turned into early mornings as we traded stories about the lives we wanted. He'd sketch on scraps of paper while I talked about chasing a career in publishing. "We'll make it big," he used to say. "You'll write and I'll draw. We'll take on the world." But life doesn't always go as planned. It started with something small, so small that at the time I didn't think twice about it. A coworker had asked about Nathan's latest project, and I made an offhand comment about how he was great at starting things but struggled to finish them. It wasn't meant to hurt him, but those words grew legs I couldn't control. By the time the rumors reached him, they had taken on a life of their own. The letter sat on my desk for days, taunting me with its simplicity. Every time I glanced at it, the words felt heavier, as if daring me to confront the part of my life I had tried so hard to leave behind. It wasn't your fault, but it could have been stopped. I knew it had to be about Nathan. No one else had ever made me feel this kind of weight, the regret that wakes you up in the middle of the night, the kind that shapes the way you live without you even realizing it. I told myself it was too late. Whatever happened to Nathan after he disappeared wasn't my business anymore. But that felt like a lie, an excuse to keep running. What if he hadn't moved on? What if this letter wasn't just a reminder of my guilt, but a plea for me to make things right? The questions wouldn't let me rest. Who had sent the letter? And why now, after all this time? I didn't have answers, but one thing was clear. I needed to find out what happened to Nathan. Whether he forgave me or not, it was time to face the truth. I started my search by going back to the places Nathan and I used to spend time. The first stop was this little cafe near campus, where we'd spent countless hours dreaming about our futures. The smell of coffee and the familiar hum of quiet conversation brought back memories, but the place had changed. Or maybe it was me who had changed. Behind the counter was Olivia, a mutual friend from those days. She spotted me before I could decide whether to stay or leave. Her warm smile faltered, replaced by something more guarded. "Emily," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and caution. "It's been a while." I nodded awkwardly, unsure how to begin. After a moment, I told her about the letter. Her expression tightened. When I mentioned Nathan's name, her shoulders stiffened. "You're asking about Nathan? After all these years?" she said, crossing her arms. I tried to explain, but her frustration spilled over. "We all watched him fall apart, Emily. He lost everything. his clients, his confidence, his sense of purpose. And you were supposed to be his friend. Her words stung, but she finally told me he had moved to a small town to start over. As I drove toward the town Olivia had mentioned, her words echoed in my mind. You were supposed to be his friend. She wasn't wrong. I had been Nathan's closest confidant, the one person who should have stood by him. Instead, I had stayed silent when he needed me most. The guilt I had carried all these years suddenly felt heavier. I thought back to how regret had shaped my life. Every relationship I avoided, every connection I kept at arm's length, it all traced back to that moment. I had convinced myself that shutting people out was for their protection, but the truth was simpler. I didn't trust myself not to fail them, the way I'd failed Nathan. I wondered if I even had the right to show up after all this time. What if I disrupted whatever peace he had managed to build? What if my presence reopened wounds he had fought hard to heal? But the questions that plagued me wouldn't let go. What if he hadn't moved on? What if he still needed to hear from me? I didn't know if I was ready for the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't turn back now. The town was small, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. It was the last place I would have imagined Nathan ending up, and yet, as I followed Olivia's lead, I found him. He was standing in a modest art classroom, surrounded by children. His voice carried an ease I hadn't heard in years, and the kids watched him with rapt attention. He was explaining something about perspective in drawing, gesturing with his hands the way he always did when he was passionate about something. I froze in the doorway, unsure if I should step inside. He looked older, more weathered, but there was something steady about him, a calmness I hadn't seen before. It was both a relief and a punch to the gut. As I stood there, I realized how much of him I had locked away in my mind. Watching him now, I saw traces of the Nathan I once knew, but this was someone new, a man who had rebuilt himself in ways I hadn't expected. For a moment, I thought about turning around and leaving. Maybe he didn't need me anymore. Maybe he was better off without the shadow of our shared past. But I owed it to him, to both of us, to face the truth. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. Nathan noticed me almost immediately. His gaze locked on mine, and for a moment neither of us moved. I saw the recognition flash in his eyes, followed quickly by something harder to read. Discomfort, maybe even resentment. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but distant. "Hi, Nathan," I replied, the words catching in my throat. The classroom emptied quickly, the children filing out, leaving the two of us alone. I felt exposed under his gaze, as though the years between us hadn't dulled the weight of what I'd done. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp but controlled. "I needed to see you," I said. "To say I'm sorry." His jaw tightened. "Sorry? For what, Emily? For staying silent when everyone else turned on me? For watching me fall apart and saying nothing? Or are you just here to ease your guilt?" I flinched at his words, but I didn't look away. "I was scared, Nathan. I thought if I stayed out of it, it wouldn't make things worse. But I was wrong, and I've regretted it every day since." Nathan's shoulders dropped slightly, but his voice remained firm. "Regret doesn't fix anything. It didn't help me when I lost everything." Tears stung my eyes, but I nodded. "I know. I just wanted you to know how much I regret letting you down. Even if you never forgive me, I had to say it." He sighed, his expression softening but remaining guarded. "Forgiveness isn't something I can give you right now, Emily. You'll have to figure out how to live with what you did, just like I've had to live with it." His words stayed with me long after I walked away. Walking out of that classroom felt like stepping into a different world. The weight of Nathan's words pressed down on me, heavier than I had anticipated. You'll have to figure out how to live with what you did. I had come hoping for forgiveness, but now I realized forgiveness wasn't something I could demand or even expect. It was a process, one Nathan had clearly started for himself, and one I needed to begin for myself too. For 10 years I had let regret define me. It had kept me stuck, afraid to form real connections, afraid to trust myself. Regret had become a crutch, an excuse to avoid taking responsibility for the life I was living or not living. But seeing Nathan again, seeing how he had rebuilt himself despite everything, sparked something in me. He had found a way forward, even without closure or apologies, and now it was my turn to do the same. Regret doesn't just disappear, I realized. It becomes a part of you, but it doesn't have to control you. I could learn to carry it lightly, to use it as a reminder of the lessons I'd learned, rather than as a punishment I imposed on myself. It was time to move on. Back home, I sat at my desk, staring at a blank piece of paper. Slowly, I began to write. Not to Nathan, but to my younger self. You made mistakes and they cost you someone you cared about, but you're more than those mistakes. Learn from them and let them make you better. I folded the letter and placed it in a box alongside the memories of Nathan. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about making peace. Please like, share, and subscribe. See you in the next video.